The Pokedex is an unconventional encyclopedia. Its pages contain interesting information about the creatures we catch, but also about myths, inconsistencies, existential horror, and information that makes no sense at all. In this Iceberg, we'll take a look at the secrets, mysteries, creepy elements, and more about one of the most iconic devices in the Pokémon world. Welcome to the Pokedex Iceberg.
Say my name. EisenBerg. You're goddamn right.
Certificate. Completing the Pokedex has never been an easy task, not even in Gen 1. I innocently thought that if I caught 150 Pokémon in Red and Blue, Game Freak would reward me with the mythical Pokémon Mew. The sad reality was that when I got my hands on a second Pokémon game to complete the Kanto Pokedex, I just got a certificate. As expected, I was truly disappointed, especially knowing that back then, there was no legit way to get Mew. I recall a friend having Mew in Pokémon Gold a couple of years after, a Pokémon that to this day I have no idea how he got because back then we didn't know anything about glitches. Anyway, completing the Pokédex before Gen 3 wasn't really worth it in terms of prices because there were none, unless you consider a certificate you can't even hang on your room a reward. But now let's talk about completion rewards in other generations. Pokédex completion rewards. Catching all Pokémon in Gen 1 and 2 isn't really that appealing. In fact, not even in Ruby and Sapphire was it really worth it. Nonetheless, if we managed to catch all Pokémon in the Hoenn Dex save for Jirachi and Deoxys in Emerald, the player gets to choose one of the Johto starters, Pokémon that were only available in Pokémon Colosseum in Gen 3. If you didn't have a Gamecube, a copy of Pokémon Colosseum and a Gamecube Game Boy Advance link cable to trade this Pokémon, I think it was worth completing the Hoenn Dex to obtain this Gen 2 Pokémon. Moving on to Gen 4, I thought you'd get the Shiny Charm for completing the Pokédex, until I remembered that it wasn't introduced until Gen 5, so the only reward besides the traditional completion certificate is, well, the satisfaction for completing the Sinnoh Dex. In Gen 5 and 6, if you catch every single Pokémon, you'll get the Shiny Charm, an item that increases your chances of finding shiny Pokémon. However, I'm not talking about completing each game's regional Dex, but the respective national Dex, meaning that it got harder to do it in X and Y and the Gen 3 remakes. In Gen 7 apparently, there were too many Pokémon to give each one a Pokédex entry, but from that gen onward, you would need to complete the regional Dex of each game to get access to the Shiny Charm. It's true that Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl have a national Dex, but it's not really fair calling it national, considering it's a Gen 8 game that ignores the existence of more than 400 Pokémon. Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl were just too faithful to Diamond and Pearl. While not a completion reward, in Black 2 and White 2, if you've seen all Pokémon in the Unova Dex, you'll get a permit that allows you to visit the Nature Preserve, a place where you get the chance to catch a shiny Haxorus. If you complete the Hisui Dex in Legends Arceus, you'll gain access to the Hall of Origin, where Arceus resides. In this game, if you reach Research level 10 for every Pokémon in the Hisui Dex, Xylene will reward you with a Shiny Charm. In Sword and Shield, you'll get a Replica Gold Crown, a Mark Charm that triples the chance of finding Pokémon with a mark by completing the Isle of Armor Pokédex, and a Replica State Crown if you complete the Crown Tundra Pokédex. If you complete the Kitakami Dex in Scarlet and Violet, you'll receive a Glimmering Charm that adds an extra item slot with Terra Shards of a Raids type to the reward list, and if you do the same for the Blueberry Dex, you'll get a Mark Charm. Finally, in Legend CA, if you complete the Lumiose and Hyperspace Pokédex, you'll get the title of Pokémon Professor and Hyperspace Pokémon Professor respectively, which you can display on your trainer card. Indestructible Pokédex. This is very straightforward. We've seen many Pokédex owner trainers in the anime under extreme conditions that would normally compromise any electronic device. While Ash and company haven't been exposed to the amount of fire, water, electricity and explosions that Team Rocket has, it's true they've also had their fair share of hazards. Despite that, no Pokédex has ever been destroyed to my knowledge. Switching Pokémon with the Pokédex. In the episode Mystery at the Lighthouse, Ash catches a Krabby, but its Pokeball is transferred to Professor Oak's lab because he already had 6 Pokemon in his team. However, Brock explains that if Ash wants to switch Pokemon, he can do it by pressing a white button on its Pokedex. I think this functionality is very convenient, but I don't recall Ash or anyone with a Pokedex using it whatsoever. Unknown Dex. The Unknown Dex or Unknown Mode is a feature of the Pokedex in Gen 2 and 4, and it displays all unknown letters along with words corresponding to each unknown letter. Apparently these words are completely random, but considering the Ruins of Alph had a lot of puzzles, I thought these words were some kind of clue to solve another puzzle. Pokedexes are handheld consoles. This entry refers to the fact that in some generations, the Pokedex resembles a handheld console. In Gen 1, it looks like a Game Boy, in Gen 2, a Game Boy Color, in Gen 3 in Hoenn, it looks like a Game Boy Advance, while in Kanto it resembles a Game Boy Advance SP, and in Gen 4 in Sinnoh, it resembles a Nintendo DS Lite, for example. 14,000 entries. If there's something bigger than the number of Pokemon, it's the number of Pokedex entries across the generations. According to PokeTools, a website that lets you read most Pokedex entries, there are more than 14,000 of them. One of PokeTools' features lets you search for Pokedex entries containing specific words, so if you're curious, give it a try. Lostel is mentioned in the Pokedex. There once was an incident in which it took away a child it hypnotized. The child in question appears to be Lostel, a little girl whom, as the Pokedex entry states, Hypno took away. It's interesting to note that this exact same entry from Fire Red already appeared in the original Pokémon Red and Green, meaning that this Pokedex entry may have inspired this quest in the remakes. Pokémon rivalries. There are a lot of Pokémon that don't get along very well. An example is that of Zangoose and Seviper, Pokémon that represent the rivalry that exists between snakes and mongooses. Tinkaton swings its hammer at rocks to send them into the sky, aiming to hit Corviknight. Due to this, flying taxis using Corviknight are discouraged in Paldea. Talking about Corviknight, it is said that Skarmory and Corviknight fight viciously over territory. However, one of the craziest rivalries is that of Golisopod and Grapploct. When these two Pokémon battle, the loser becomes the winner's meal, and the same happens between Scolipede and Centiskorch. Gen 6 has the most Pokedex entries. While it's true that Gen 7 had more Pokémon than Gen 6, the Pokédex in the Alola region didn't have a national dex, and only 403 had a Pokédex entry. However, in Oras and X and Y, every single Pokémon available at that time, meaning 721 Pokémon, had a Pokédex entry. Will we ever see something like that in future generations? Pre-Global Trade System Pokédex completion. In the 90s and early 2000s, Pokémon was a much more social experience, especially if you wanted to battle or trade Pokémon with your family, friends, classmates or neighbors. In order to do so, you needed a Game Link cable, an additional Game Boy, another copy of a Pokémon game, and another human who owned them. I recall trading with friends at school, and it wasn't just about getting Pokémon we didn't have, but about peeking into the other person's PC boxes, checking out their items, seeing how far they had progressed, looking at their team, and discovering all sorts of interesting things about their unique Pokémon experience. I also remember this one time, and I think I've mentioned it in a previous Iceberg, when I caught a 100 something level glitch Nidoking that I raised all the way up to level 255 with rare candies and used it in a battle against a friend. We couldn't stop laughing at how absolutely ridiculous the whole situation was. This was the pre-global trade system era because before the GTS was introduced in Diamond and Pearl, Pokémon players had to socialize if they wanted to obtain Pokémon or items they didn't have, unless you were one of those kids who owned 2 Game Boys and at least 2 Pokémon games. It's not that you can't do that anymore, but since the GTS shifted the focus towards straightforward trades and online battles with little to no social interaction, there's a clear before and after in the Pokémon series when it comes to how players interacted with one another. Of course, this allowed players to complete their Pokédex way easier, compared to depending on knowing somebody who happened to have the version you didn't have. Mirror Move Spearow. It busily flits around here and there. Even if it is frail, it can be a tough foe that uses Mirror Move. This is Spearow's Fire Red Pokédex entry, and there's a problem with it. I don't know if Professor Oak was on something, but the most renowned Pokémon professor in the world failed to realize that Spearow can't learn Mirror Move. Not even Spearow given away at events know this move. Porygon's Legends Arceus Pokédex entry. It has no discernible heartbeat and does not seem to draw breath, and yet it appears to function without issue. I cannot even begin to explain this utterly bizarre anomaly, and this is what Professor Laventon says about Porygon, a Pokémon that is completely out of place in the Hisui region because it was created during the digital era of the Pokémon world. Of course, this artificial Pokémon arrived through space-time distortions, but what makes it different from other Pokémon that arrived in Hisui in the same way is the fact that it's the only Pokémon that is not really a life form. I wonder if Laventon's discovery of this Pokémon helped develop some sort of technology thanks to the knowledge acquired from studying it. Living Dex. The Pokédex can be forgiving when it comes to completing it. For example, it doesn't require you to see or catch most mythical Pokémon to complete a regional or national dex. Also, as long as a Pokémon was in your possession at some point, it still counts for completion, even if you no longer have it. However, some Pokémon fans can't get enough by just completing the Pokédex. They want to have every single Pokémon in their possession. This is what is called a living dex. Depending on which game you're playing, having a living dex can be difficult or frustratingly difficult, especially because having a living dex, unlike completing the national dex, doesn't exclude mythical Pokémon. You're not going to believe this, but sometimes even a living dex isn't enough, because where are all the regional forms? Where are all the unknown letters? Where are all 63 alchemy forms? Well, to top it all off, some extreme players even aim to collect every Pokémon with gender differences. That almost doubles the amount of Pokémon you need to catch. Imagine if they also need to collect every single Pokémon and their variants in all their 25 natures. I hope it never gets to the point where somebody out of their mind tries to collect all these Pokémon I'm talking about with every possible IV combination. I should have talked about that insane number in my Iceberg on impossibly rarest events in Pokémon, but I guess it's too late. However, there might be something even crazier than that, and you probably know what I'm talking about, but we'll see that deeper in the iceberg. Real-world Pokédex entries. It's evident that we live in a different place from the Pokémon world, because have you ever seen a Pidove, a Dugong, a Flamigo, or any animal in real life that closely resembles these almost alien creatures? Despite that, there are mentions in early Pokédex entries that talk about real-life animals, as well as locations present in our world. For example, Lickitung can extend its tongue like a chameleon, Shellos and Gastrodon eat microscopic plankton, and Indian elephants appear on ghastly and righteous Pokédex entries, although these elephants are replaced with Copperasha in Legends Arceus. Arcanine is a legendary Pokémon from China. Poliwrath can swim back and forth across the Pacific Ocean, among other examples. As years went by, these references were abandoned to distance the Pokémon world from ours. Pokémon as food. If your perpetual fate is to be seen by others as food, then you are a Caterpie, because that's exactly what its Ultramoon Pokédex entry says. There are other Pokémon that share the same fate as this Gen 1 bug. Here are some of them. Golbat drinks so much blood that they fall to the ground and become food for other Pokémon. Sharpedo's dorsal fin was a treasured foodstuff, so this Pokémon became a victim of overfishing. Weavile's main food source in Alola is Vulpix and Sandshrew, which they carefully divide among their group. It's nice that they do it carefully. The food Frostlass most relishes is the souls of men. Be wary of Frostlass. Mandibus' choicest food is Cubone. Doesn't Cubone have enough being an orphan? Talonflame's favorite foods are Wingull and Pikipek. Sliggoo has trouble drawing a line between friends and food. It will calmly try to melt and eat even those it gets along well with. With friends like that, who needs enemies? Shiny Living Dex. We've seen more or less what a living dex is, although its real definition depends a lot on certain players because a living dex may require all regional forms, variants, and gender differences for each Pokémon. However, a shiny living dex refers to the same thing but with shiny Pokémon. There are many ways to catch shiny Pokémon. We have full odds shiny hunters and others that do whatever it takes to increase their odds of finding shiny Pokémon. To nobody's surprise, there are a few people that have shiny living dexes, but again, what a shiny living dex is depends on many things. For example, VIVILLON is a Pokémon with 20 forms, some rarer than others. However, if a player has at least a shiny version of that species, regardless of their variants, that will count for some, although not for everyone. Some even say that nobody currently has a shiny living dex simply because there are shiny locked Pokémon like Victini. Others would argue that as long as a shiny Pokémon hasn't been officially released, you don't need to have it in your possession. What do you think about it? Mega Evolution Pokédex entries. If PETA read these Pokédex entries, I'm sure they would step in because some of them have to do with the suffering of the Pokémon experiencing this phenomenon. Obviously, I'm not gonna talk about all of them, so here are the most painful ones. Aerodactyl will attack anything that moves. Mega Evolution is a burden on its body, so it's incredibly irritated. Scizor stores the excess energy from Mega Evolution, so after a long time passes, its body starts to melt. Houndoom's red claws and the tips of its tails are melting from high internal temperatures that are painful to Houndoom itself. Due to the colossal power poured into it, Tyranitar's back split right open. Its destructive instincts are the only thing keeping it moving. Excess energy melted Garchamp's arms and wings, transforming them into giant scythes. When Gardevoir opens the red plate on its chest and unleashes its heart, its strongest psychic power is released. The power of Mega Evolution was so strong that it smashed Glalie jaw. Its inability to eat very well leaves Glalie irritated. Pokémon from unknown regions. There are a few but interesting entries that talk about how Pokémon we thought originated in a certain region are native to them. Quaxly migrated to Paldea from distant lands long ago. With its sharp fangs, Yungoos will bite anything. It did not originally live in Alola, but was imported from another region. Copperasha came over from another region long ago and worked together with humans. I wonder if Winds and Waves will give us an answer about this Pokémon. Pacific Town was foreseen in Corsola's Silver Pokédex entry. In a South Sea nation, the people live in communities that are built on groups of these Pokémon. If you played Ruby, Sapphire and Emerald, you know what place Corsola's Pokédex entry is referring to. An NPC in Pacific Town states that the town floats on top of a colony of Corsola. Whether Pacific Town was inspired by this very Pokédex entry or it was designed independently remains a mystery. Death entries. Death is everywhere in Pokémon. The Pokémon Tower, Ghost Pokémon, and the Pokédex. Rattata's incisors continue growing until its death. Primeape has been known to become so angry that it dies as a result. Its face looks peaceful in death, however. Alakazam's brain cells continue to increase in number until its death. With its disheveled white fur, Hisuian's Zoroark looks like an embodiment of death. Lampent arrives near the moment of death and steals spirit from the body. Komala remains asleep from birth to death as a result of the sedative properties of the leaves that form its diet. Can you imagine being asleep from birth to death? Isn't that the same as just being dead? Maybe it dreams about something, so probably it's not as bad as not existing at all, but I guess Komala's experience isn't as rich as other Pokémon. Pain that never goes away. When it comes to pain and Pokédex entries, we think about mega evolved Pokémon. However, a Pokédex entry that hurts just from reading it can be found in Pokémon Stadium 2 if Pokémon Red, Silver or Crystal are inserted. The entry in question is Houndoom's. If you're burned by the flames it shoots from its mouth, the pain will never go away. This actually sounds like the pain somebody would suffer if they were in hell. What's sad about burns is that, depending on how severe they are, some of them can actually last for life, so please don't play with fire, unless it's a fire Pokémon. Claydol's Ancient Apparition. The ancient people who made it apparently modeled it after something that descended from the sky. I've spoken about this entry in my Iceberg on alternate realities and aliens in Pokémon, and I said how scary it would have been for ancient people to find something in the sky that looks like a Claydol but not exactly a Claydol. Given that this Pokémon has a lot of eyes, I wonder if the encounter is inspired by biblically accurate angels. Physics-defying Pokédex entries. There are many moments in the anime and the games that break the laws of physics. For example, when Ash holds a one-ton creature on his hands. But now let's move on to the Pokédex. According to its Fire Red Pokédex entry, Machamp can launch 1000 punches in 2 seconds. While not even Ultra Instinct Gogeta would be able to punch this many times, I did some research and I found that mosquitoes can flap their wings up to 1200 times per second. Of course, a wing flap is nothing compared to a punch, but it's fascinating to learn that animals can move their bodies that fast. Gardevoir, besides other things, is well known for creating small black holes. Now, while some may imagine that a black hole the size of a fist would be enough to engulf a human being or a Pokémon, the reality is much more extreme. If we had a black hole the size of a fist, it would weigh about 99 octillion kilograms, the equivalent of roughly 17,000 Earth masses. Even if the black holes Gardevoir creates to protect its trainer had event horizons as small as a Planck length, the smallest scale at which our current laws of physics break down, they would still release energy equivalent to roughly half a ton of TNT if they evaporated. So next time you catch a Gardevoir, think twice about getting too attached to it, because the consequences may be explosive at best. This is not a Pokédex entry, but I think it's worth mentioning because of how nonsensical it is. According to a website on the Pokémon Sword and Shield DLC, it states that Ice Rider Calyrex can reach a temperature of -300 degrees, a temperature below absolute zero. This is impossible because absolute zero refers to a state where particles have reached their lowest possible energy state. Going lower than the lowest possible energy state doesn't even make any sense. Creepy Pokédex entries. One thing the Pokédex is well known for is its creepy Pokédex entries. Let's take a look at some of them. Gengar apparently wishes for a traveling companion. Since it was once human itself, it tries to create one by taking the lives of other humans. This reminds me of Yamask because it also mentions Pokémon being former humans. Gigantamax Gengar lays traps, hoping to steal the lives of those it catches. If you stand in front of its mouth, you'll hear your loved one's voices calling out to you. Whether the voices are real or not, getting close to a Gengar in this form can be traumatizing and dangerous. Eerie cries emanate from Gourgai's body in the dead of night. The sounds are said to be the wails of spirits who are suffering in the afterlife. We know the Pokédex is infamous for containing legends and myths, but if this were true, it would mean that hell is a real place in the Pokémon world. The Pokédex doesn't make sense. If you thought that this doesn't make sense, the Pokédex goes a step beyond. The Pokédex is an encyclopedia containing information on every Pokémon species, even those long believed to be nothing more than myths like Mew. But let's talk about how the Pokédex doesn't make sense at all, starting with the fact that the Pokédex isn't really an encyclopedia. An encyclopedia contains knowledge on specific topics, but the Pokédex is basically blank when the professor in turn gives it to you. Your task is to go around the world and identify species that apparently somebody else has already written about. Basically, what you're doing is completing your own empty Pokédex rather than a database on Pokémon around the world. Another problem is that a lot of entries are completely unscientific, based on myths or unconfirmed stories that contradict the Pokémon world itself. One of the most infamous cases is that of Kadabro, whose Fire Red Pokédex entry states that a boy with extrasensory powers awoke in bed transformed into a Kadabro. Kadabro's evolution is no stranger to weird Pokédex entries, as in Red and Blue it is stated that it has an IQ of 5000. IQ tests are designed so that the average score is 100, with results following a normal distribution defined by a standard deviation of about 15. In this system, scores become exponentially rarer the further they move from the average. Because of this, IQ tests become increasingly unreliable at extreme values. Statistically speaking, across all humans who have ever lived, the highest plausible IQ would likely fall somewhere in the low 200s. Saying that Alakazam has an IQ of 5000 makes no sense at all, so let's say it's just very intelligent. Future Paradox Pokémon Pokédex entries. Paradox Pokémon are fascinating because they originate in opposite extremes of the Pokémon timeline, or maybe from the distant past and future from different timelines. While past Paradox Pokémon are organic, those from the future lack any organic elements. This is supported by the fact that the Pokédex calls them objects. However, there's a particular entry that talks about the, let's call it, union between. Okay, let's just take a look at it. Iron Jugulis. It resembles a certain Pokémon introduced in a paranormal magazine, described as the offspring of a high dragon that fell in love with a robot. This is obviously just a tale, but now let's take a look at other Pokédex entries. Iron Threads. This Pokémon closely resembles a scientific weapon that a paranormal magazine claimed was sent to this planet by aliens. This is an extraordinary claim because it implies that this Pokémon originate from an alien civilization. It means that maybe humans moved on to different planets and developed differently alongside Pokémon, or maybe actually aliens tried to replicate Pokémon with technology that resulted in all future Paradox Pokémon. Iron Bundle. Its shape is similar to a robot featured in a paranormal magazine article. The robot was said to have been created by an ancient civilization. Considering that we're talking about a technologically advanced entity, I wonder what kind of civilization the Pokédex is talking about. Iron Moth. This Pokémon resembles an unknown object described in a paranormal magazine as a UFO sent to observe humanity. Again, we get another hint about future Paradox Pokémon being connected to an unnamed alien civilization. Iron Thorns. It has some similarities to a Pokémon introduced in a dubious magazine as a Tyranitar from 1 billion years into the future. To put that into perspective, only 65 years, 7 months and 3 days passed between the Wright brothers' first powered flight and humanity's first moon landing. Now imagine how far technology could advance over the course of 1 billion years. In fact, in a billion years, it is expected that humans and other complex life forms will go extinct because the sun is expected to be 10% brighter due to its stellar evolution. It doesn't sound like a lot, but that's enough for oceans to evaporate, and water vapor in the atmosphere would create a stronger greenhouse effect that would make the planet even hotter. Beta Pokédex. The Beta Pokédex refers to all the unreleased Pokémon that, at one point in development, had partial Pokédex entries but never made it into the official games. This includes the scrapped Pokémon from the Space World 97 prototype, as well as beta designs from the development of Ruby and Sapphire. Sadly, the Space World 97 prototype Pokémon have a placeholder description stating that they're newly discovered Pokémon. However, many beta Pokémon from Ruby and Sapphire have very interesting entries. If you want to look at all the Pokémon that never saw the light of day in Gen 3, check out my Ruby, Sapphire and Emerald anomalies Iceberg, because including all of them in this video would be too much. Purun. A Pokémon that loves to fly with a human riding it. It quietly flies and is completely comfortable to ride. When it tires, it rests with its wings floating atop the sea. Eruhoku. With its large wings, it can create wind as fast as 30 meters. A legend exists where it blew away the clouds and the sun shone down on the people. Katakata. It is said that if you get lost in a deep forest, it will sound its horn to show the way home. People who see its figure seem to become happy. Maki. It can run 50 meters in 7 seconds flat. Sometimes it may accidentally drop its child. It brushes its teeth by gnawing on hard objects. Eboroto. How it manipulates its body is mostly unconfirmed. It has no visible mouth and ears, but it is only known to react to sound and light. Existentially troubling Pokédex entries. Horror doesn't always lie in the fear of being threatened by something or someone, paranormal or not, but in the harrowing realization that there are real things way bigger than humankind itself. The sense of helplessness about cosmic scale events or an impending doom that we have no choice but to witness. Honestly, real life can be way scarier than what any Pokédex entry states, but let's take a look at them anyway. Mega Alakazam's hidden psychic power has been unleashed. A glance at someone gives it knowledge of the course of that person's life from birth to death. I guess ignorance is bliss. It's unknown what thought processes would take place in the brain of a creature with an IQ of 5,000, if that makes any sense. But if it's remotely close to that of a human being, it would be one of the most terrifying things to experience. While being able to see or at least determine somebody's past just by looking at them sounds like an awesome ability, seeing the end of everyone around you must be totally incompatible with somebody's sanity. Satu stands rooted and still in one spot all day long. People believe that this Pokémon does so out of fear of the terrible things it has foreseen in the future. Something we almost never think about is just how vast the future really is, spanning from the smallest measurable unit of time from this very moment all the way to the end of the universe. Whether Satu is thinking about the next global war or the end of the universe, nobody really knows, but it must be a terrifying sight to behold. Talking about this, I can't help but wonder what our planet will look like when the sun starts its process of becoming a red giant and the oceans of our planet boil away, turning it into a lifeless rock. Even if humankind is able to spread across the galaxy and somehow survives over the span of trillions of years, in around a Google years, meaning 10 to the power of 100 years, the universe will reach a state where almost all ordinary matter has long since decayed or been locked away in the remnants of black holes. I guess I need to finish this iceberg before I end up like Satu. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up, leave a comment and subscribe to my channel. I also have icebergs on more video game franchises such as Mario, Zelda, Resident Evil and Stellar Blade, so please check out the EisenBerg experience. See you in the next one.